I apologize for not having been here a couple of months ago, but I had nothing whatsoever to do with it. I was not feeling well at all. I ended up in the hospital for a week. I was contagious as a couple of people came in, and of course they got to gown up and they got to put the masks on and the gloves and everything else. So
organisms, right?
Organisms, and these were viral organisms. RNA life. And so that's been around for 4 billion years or so, and we've been around for what, 100,000, 200,000? They win every time. So we made it. So this is part 3 of thinking critically. As remember, it's not critical thinking. Oh, it advanced. Okay, I've got the right buttons. Again, our definition, it's a mental process. So this is a verb. This is not a noun. It's not something you can acquire. It's not something you can buy, build, purchase. It's something which is a process. It's something you've got to learn to do. Yes, learning. That painful thing that we do with the frontal lobes. Yeah. Last time we discussed the human brain. We looked into how it changes and how it works. We looked at the origin of biases, prejudices, and knowledge. So at this point, you are all highly skilled, ready for a test of critical thinking skills. Now I warn you, this test can be passed by children. We all know that the child-proof cap, if you want to open it, you hand it to a child. So here we are. This is a test for children. Question 1. How do you put a giraffe in a refrigerator? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You open the door, you put the giraffe in the refrigerator, and you close the door. Oh, did that come out knowing the door? Mm-hmm. Okay, you got it? Now let's move on to step 2. How do you put an elephant into the refrigerator?
You're going to take the giraffe.
Exactly. You open the door, you take the giraffe out. Then you can put the elephant into the refrigerator. Then you close the door. Okay. Here's question 3. The lion called the meaning of all the animals. Which one was not there? Well, the elephant. It's in the refrigerator. Okay. You come to the river where the man-eating crocodiles live. There's no boat. There's no bridge. How do you get across? Well, you swim because all the crocodiles are at the meeting. So how did you do on this test of critical thinking skills? I told you children could pass this. Okay, this week we're looking at a number of things. I've changed it a little bit from my first thoughts on this. A lot of it had to do with the ideas of fake news and such. So we're going to talk about arguments. However, this is in the context of determining that which is true, that which is false, and that which is unknown. We'll take a look at language. We'll look at the responsibilities of the person making the statements. Yes, the person making the statements, even if it's Twitter, that person is responsible. The responsibilities of those who hear or read the statements. We'll consider opinions, reasoned statements, and facts. We'll look at logical arguments, syllogisms, conditionals, and the 4 impossibles. For those of you who don't know about impossibles, we'll look at that. We'll start by asking, what's the purpose of language? And really there are 4. We can have variations on them, but there are 4. The first is to convey information. Secondly, to provide warnings. Third, to express one's state of mind. And fourth, let's not forget this one, to dissemble. To lie. And people say, well, no, animals don't lie. There's wonderful stuff out there, especially on the internet, that you can look up, where little baby baboons are being beaten up by their elders, and they will give the cry that's hawk. And everyone will just disappear. And now the little kid is sitting there with the fruit that he stole from the big kids. Okay? Yeah, we're good at it. Which leads us to the point of you are responsible for the things you say and the things you write. Even on Twitter. The other half of the rule is, I am not responsible for disproving the ravings of a lunatic. So we can see that there's a conflict here. On the one side, what is said may be disputed without cause, without reason. If you state your opinion, I could say you're full of it. We have both stated our opinions, we walk away. Done. However, at that point, we also have to say, what is said must be defended. Sooner or later, you have to defend what you said. The defense is always some kind of an argument in which opinions, reasoned statements, experimental data, or established facts are assembled in a logical progression to support the original statement. If the original statement cannot be supported, it must be modified until it can be. And if you can't do that, you have to withdraw it completely. No, it wasn't the largest crowd in the history of the United States at the inauguration. See?
Quit pounding the podium.
It was such a profound statement that I knocked the microphone over. So when we get to the idea of arguments, there's some form of deductive reasoning in every case. They're deductions. So we're not inducing, we're not going out there and performing the experiment to find the data. We're starting out with something which is known, or that which we believe to be known. Typically there are three. There's syllogisms, conditionals, and logical arguments. And we have the basic syllogism, or silly argument, as I say. All elephants are gray. Elsie is an elephant, so Elsie is gray. Notice the relationships that we have here. The relationship is elephant. So as long as we continue to talk about elephants, we're hunky-dory. However, we can, let me back up one. So by substitution, Elsie is gray elephant, so we can make that kind of an equation, which really isn't true, right? But it looks good, doesn't it? It puts gray in the middle, so gray it looks like it's the defining characteristic, whereas it isn't. It's elephant. Now, here's the other one, a silly argument. All elephants are gray. Elsie is gray, therefore Elsie is an elephant. We see there's a problem here, don't we? That is, the idea of grayness overwhelms us, and we're looking at grayness. So that although the first statement may be true, the second statement is not a specific example of the rule. That is, that first statement up there, this one right here, is the rule. It's true, by definition. And everything else must conform to that. So, we reach an invalid conclusion. It's really easy to do with syllogisms. That's one of the reasons we tend to avoid them. Here's another one. And in the modern era, this is one of those that just rankles, doesn't it?
What's the problem?
And of course, the problem that exists is right here. That is, we have two different definitions of the same word. In this one, we mean mankind, all of humans. And in this one, we mean the male of the species. And so we've just utilized this skill, this substitution, to bring up another illogical argument. And again, one of the things we have to watch out for in syllogisms. So here is the breakdown. So this is the second statement is not a specific example of the first statement. We have equivocation here. That is, the idea that there are two forms which are equivalent is, of course, a fallacy. We'll go more into that next time around. Conditionals. Conditionals I like. You can work with them far more easily. This is the if-then statement. So, if she is rich, then she wears diamonds. Now that's the rule. So, for all of you who are out there who are rich, you have to wear diamonds. You notice I have no diamonds on. So, when I see a woman wearing a diamond, is she rich? You notice we just turned that around. And this is one of the nice part about conditionals. You can set up tests of conditionals very easily. The first one is the if-then. We notice that we start here, rich, not rich. That is, if she is rich versus if she is not rich. By definition, the rule says she wears diamonds. However, if we look down here, could you wear diamonds if you're not rich? Sure. Or not. So the only time you can actually make a clear-cut statement about this is if the person is not wearing diamonds, then they're not rich. Otherwise, you can't choose either of these. Both could be true. Now, we get into things like further arguments. We can begin to put probabilities on here and say what's the likelihood of an event occurring. And this would be a decision diagram at that point. We can also make a Venn diagram. Whoop, too many. That is, we can set up the condition of all women. And we can set up the condition called rich women. And here's wears diamonds. Notice that the wears diamonds includes all rich, but also includes those who are just regular people. And so again, two different ways of looking at conditionals. That's one of the reasons we try to prefer putting things in the form of an if-then, because it's easier to test than it is with a syllogism. So we can look at an example. Bobby is a poor boy who stole a bicycle. Wow. Let's put this in. What do we know? What can we conclude? Do we have a problem with people who are named Bobby? Do we have a problem with poor or boy? Could they steal something other than bicycles? Do they have to steal anything? And so, again, we can set up a diagram. Come on, back up. Go to back up one. There we go. And here's a conditional diagram. Notice that there was no physical statement of that which is true. It's just that Bobby stole a bicycle. So we can sit there and say there's a poor boy and a not poor boy. Could either one steal or not steal? Yeah. So we know nothing. And it's the joy of a conditional. We can demonstrate that no matter what the outcome is, we didn't know it to begin with. It was a logical outcome. So what can we say about poor boys? The best we can do is some. But we must also conclude in here, most aren't anything. They're just boys. So, which is better? And this leads us into that wonderful situation of, I like this and you don't. But I think what we can say is syllogisms are simply harder to figure out. And the syllogisms are more prone to invalid arguments. Conditionals have multiple techniques to test them, and they're less prone to arguments. So typically, we try to put things in the form of a conditional and try to avoid syllogisms as an argument. Then we get to what most people consider to be an argument, the logical argument. That is, the giving of reasons. All arguments must have a premise. All arguments must lead to a conclusion. The premise must lead to the conclusion. Sounds straightforward, doesn't it? There can be assumptions, sure. You can have qualifiers, yep. You can have counter-arguments. In fact, you must have counter-arguments. Premises are reasons that either support or negate the conclusion. And again, most people work really hard to get this part and never get that part. There are three types of premises that we can deal with. There are opinions, there are reasoned statements, and there are facts. And we'll be looking at these things in a little bit more detail, a lot more detail. The problem with opinions is, of course, they're unsupported by evidence. Oh, what's evidence? Why do we need evidence for? This is my opinion. It's unexplained. Once again, we don't need it. Everyone has one. Now we can all fill in the rest of that one, can't we? Everyone has one. No, you're not entitled to your opinion. There is nothing in law, there's nothing in the Constitution which says you have the right to an opinion. In many countries, including this one, expressing an opinion can get you put in jail, can get you thrown out of a job, there's all sorts of dire consequences to holding an opinion. It's unassailable as long as you don't support it. If you simply blurt it out and don't try to do anything with it, it's essentially unassailable. And we will look at some of the ways of handling that. So that it's not assailable as long as it's not supported, and it's not impossible. Let's take an example. This, kids. You're trying to explain to your kids why you should go to college. And you're going to come up with some idea of premises. So you're going to come up with some basic definitions, basic ideas. You'll earn more money. To which the students, your kid says, but I'm going to spend a ton. Well, that's true. So we have both a positive and a negative. There are other things. If you graduate, you'll have a more satisfying life. Healthier. Greater choice of interesting and satisfying jobs. You can come up with all of these things. At that point, you test them. You say, are these reasonable things to put into the argument? So, if you graduate, you will earn more money. In general, that's true. If we look at the statistics, people who graduate from college make an awful lot more money over their lifetime than people who graduate only from high school. People with higher degrees, again, tend to make a lot more money than people with lower degrees. So, again, a general truism, if we will. If you graduate, you'll have a more satisfying... Who knows? College is very expensive. Boy, ain't that the truth, huh? University of Illinois was very pleased to announce that they weren't going to raise tuitions this year. And it comes out to what, $19,000 a year? I'm sorry, that's a lot of money. Healthier life? Maybe. Because you can afford life insurance and that kind of thing. Okay, so there is some validity, so we're going to use them. We can test the premises. Again, do they relate to the conclusion? This is very important. A premise must relate to the conclusion. In the same way that simply because Elsie was gray, she was not an elephant. Do these premises relate to the conclusion? Or are they going off into left field? And we can say, yeah, okay. So we would set up an argument. And here's how you would set it up. Notice that we've got graduate from college. That's the conclusion. And here are the different premises which we were working with. Here's the fact. That's an opinion. Fact. These could be reasoned statements. Notice the arrows. Squiggly arrows are opinions. This arrow is going up. This arrow is going down. This is supporting. This is not supporting. We can emphasize this further with the thickness of the arrows. So this is a strong relationship and a strong relationship. These two, sort of average. This is weak. So you got one strong one in one direction, a strong one in the other direction. You end up relying upon these over here. Not necessarily the best arguments in the world, but at least they're going in your direction. And this is a very weak argument, so we can sort of eliminate it. We don't really want to use that. So, although graduating is more expensive, the likelihood is that you'll get a good job. The likelihood is that you'll earn more. If you earn more and have a good job, then you can probably have a more satisfying job. You'll have health insurance and that kind of thing. So, if so, you could lead a more satisfying life, which says, so graduate from college. That's the general rule that we can come up with from a basic argument. Whoop. So how do we get some of these things? If we look at the strength of the premises themselves can be weak or strong. Facts are always strong. Reasons, moderate to... And of course, opinions are always weak. The strength of the denying premises, this is one that we harp on constantly in thinking critically. Beware of confirmation bias. All of us will come up with an argument which supports our pet idea, whatever that pet idea is. We who teach this stuff say, for every positive argument, you have to have a negative. Even as a weak negative, you've got to come up with something that's negative. You simply can't have the entire argument your way. That's not how the world works. And validity. Is the premise itself valid? And does it in fact relate to the conclusion? Facts are common premises. They're not the most common by far. The strength of the fact uses the premise is the acceptance by relevant professionals. I don't care what an amateur says about a scientific field. Really, I don't care. I'm not going to argue with Mike about atomic physics. Mike knows far more than I will ever know. In fact, I will turn to him and say, how does that work again? There are people out here with all sorts of skills. I would not tell a truck driver how to drive a truck. I have no idea how to drive a truck. I can get around in a car. I'm pretty good at it. But am I good enough to drive around a racetrack? Oh, heavens no. I don't have those skills. And so you're always going to turn to someone who's a professional in this area. Again, because of their acceptance, I went too far. Because of their acceptance, facts are the strongest support there is. So rely on facts. Denying of facts requires demonstrable proof in the same way that the fact required proof to begin with. If you're going to say the fact is not true, you have to come up with it. That's the old Carl Sagan thing, isn't it? Right? Reasoned statements. Reasoned statements are perhaps the most common thing that we all try to use. Reasoned statements are arguments in and of themselves. They are evaluated as conclusions to arguments. The premises of reasoned statements must be supported, and reasoned statements must be relevant. So when you come up with a reasoned statement, the reason I do this is because, and here are my facts, and you use that as a premise, we treat it as just another argument. And it must be validated in exactly the same way. Opinions. We all try to avoid them in any kind of a logical situation. In logic, pure logic, opinions can be used as premises in a logical argument, and they are all the time. When used, all opinions are weak. In thinking critically, they can't be used. Because we're thinking, we're not using that emotional vehicle. However, opinions used to support opinions makes them reasoned statements. I like this because it's better. Where was the fact anywhere in that? And yet that is a reasoned statement. and therefore can be used, even in thinking critically, as a reasoned statements. Reasoned statements are logical arguments, which again must be supported to be valid. Oops, I keep going too fast. Example of arguable opinions. I want to go back. When is an opinion arguable? There it is. Oh, I'm going too fast. Okay, when is an opinion arguable? This is open to some conjecture, but I suggest the following. An opinion can be argued when it's impossible. That is, under normal circumstances, if you say, that's my opinion, and you walk away, you don't try to support it in any way, you can't argue the opinion. It is what it is. But if it's impossible, then you can step up to the bat. However, if the opinion holder provides any support for his opinion, it is no longer an opinion. It's a reasoned argument. And once again is open to all of the classical arguments.
Can you give us an example of an impossible opinion?
Look at this. Here's some impossibilities. Here's the 4 impossibilities. The first is the logical impossibility, which is any statement that denies itself. And I've come up with this one. The completely black cat was pure white all over. Yeah, now, I'm not sure how many times I can come up with these kinds of things, but that's fairly obvious. Either the light is absorbed or it is reflected in some part. And in this case it says all the light is absorbed. In this case, all the light is reflected. Can't have both. So that is the highest level of impossibility. Do we run into people who will come up with these impossible arguments? Yeah. Every once in a while I'll run into it. This is the most common, the scientific impossibility. That is a statement which denies a scientifically valid truth. So I just built a perpetual motion machine. No, you didn't. No, sorry, friction exists. That's the way it works. A third one, again, one can get a little tricky sometimes. The temporal, spatial, technological impossibility. Time and space are against it. So Julius Caesar steps down from his limousine, and Brutus Cassius just shoots him dead with his .44 Magnum. No. Something about automobiles and firearms in 40 BC just doesn't work out, does it? No. Then there's this one, which is probably the weakest of them all. I couldn't have killed him because it's against the law, or because it's against my religion or my moral code. I remember a few years ago, a pilot deliberately flew his plane into the ocean. And everyone said, well, he couldn't possibly have done it because he's a Muslim. And somehow the logic escaped me. That, this is a very, very weak impossibility. So these are the kinds of things that you can use to argue an opinion. If it's not one of these, you just got to let it sit. Whoop. So, examples of arguable opinions. Earth is flat. Humans lived at the same time as dinosaurs. Modern humans were created in a single act. Evolution doesn't exist. The landing on the moon never happened. No. Can we argue those immediately? Sure. The Earth is flat. Sorry, we went to the moon. We looked back on Earth. We found it to be round. We found the moon to be round. We found, Saturn is round, and so is Jupiter, and wow! So the flat things out there just can't possibly exist once they're gone beyond a certain mass. And we know that once the mass is obtained, then it's going to collapse into a spherical object. Oops. Humans lived at the same time as dinosaurs. This is classic. Mike brings this up all the time. The spread of the arms is the length of our planet. And where does life come in? Well, life comes in somewhere about here, but it stays as either viruses or a single cell all the way up to right in And then we get the Cambrian explosion, and we get dinosaurs, and we get to the very tip of the fingernail, and that's us. Wow. Humans lived the same time as dinosaurs? No. Dinosaurs died here. We're here. There's 65 million years between us. Nope. Again, science comes up to the forefront. Modern humans were created in a single act, in a single time. Here's humans. If we start down in this corner, which is this right here, we see that this is about 10 million years ago. And we went through all of this. Here's us. There we are. So here's us 200,000 years ago. Yeah, something happened. Hello?
Yeah, that works if you accept traditional science.
Yeah, if you accept facts and data, yeah.
Right. Say there are footprints that show dinosaurs and humans at the same time in a fossil or something, or they deny the carbon dating or the radioactive dating evidence and so forth. So this is good for a certain set of arguments.
Yeah, if a person comes up with this opinion, you have the ability to argue the opinion. And now you are arguing, whoops, let me go back. You have the ability to argue this opinion based upon a scientific impossibility. That's all we're saying, is that you can now challenge blurt. Even if they don't support it, you have the ability to say, that is scientifically impossible. And you have the science on your side. They're the ones that have to disprove science. You don't have to.
Well, I think
There's a whole cottage industry of people who do that.
I'm sorry.
And I think there are folks who will offer fabricated scientific evidence. I think it's very interesting to the example of the fossil record with footsteps. People make things up, or there are folks that, position themselves as scientists in the field. What happens when you've got, it's the best way to get an argument, you have two opposing sides presenting their...
There's no science on what happens if you die. The science that we're all saying here is, under most circumstances, you can't challenge any opinion. It's simply there, as long as it's not supported. In this case, you can come up with the argument immediately and say, if this is what your opinion is, I can tell you that's scientifically impossible. I have the science on my side to say, what you have said is impossible. It is now up to you to turn your opinion into a reasoned statement. And now we can continue on a normal course. We're now looking at an argument. The moment they support, they're in the form of an argument. We now are back into the situation of premises. What premise is valid? What premise is invalid? What evidence do you have to support your premise? What evidence do you have which counters your argument? And now we begin the balance, the weighing. Again, what is an argument? It is the weighing of premises. And so we say, we have now turned an opinion into a reasoned statement by us saying, no. What you just said is impossible. Otherwise, you can't touch it.
Yeah. I don't believe that the fossil record shows that dinosaurs and humans walked the earth at the same time. But I have encountered people who believe there is scientific evidence.
Believe. We'll get to the word believe in a little bit.
Well, I think it's interesting. Science is kind of the ironclad, heavyweight argument that we can make, right? We put that forward. If you have any guidance for when you're in a conversation or an argument with an individual who insists that they have scientific evidence that climate change is a hoax.
As long as they're going to come up with this idea that they have scientific data, wonderful. Put it on the table. Let us put it on the table and let us evaluate it based upon the standard criteria of science. How valid is your information? What kind of information do you have? Who is putting this data together? Let's look at it, let's put it and compare it. And the moment we go to comparison, we have vast amount of data coming from every country in the world, from every ocean, from satellites and everything else on the one side, and whatever they've got on their side. And now we have a valid argument being made, rather than this opinion just sticking out there, just hanging in there, and you can do nothing about it. What you've done is you have taken this opinion and turned it into a logical argument. Now, they're forced to get into a position of defending, which is all you want to do in the first place. You just didn't want to let that sit there. And how do you get this argument going? You say, it's scientifically impossible. And that's all you're doing.
What is your success rate in going along with that?
50-50.
So we're not really going for success. We're just saying, look, the best we can do is put science in front of you, and
Yeah.
just as we always like.
Again, it's one of those things that Sagan was just so good at. He would sit there and say, you know, if you're trying to explain something and it's huge, you need an enormous amount of evidence. The bigger the thing you're trying to explain, the more evidence you have. Now, if I've got a massive amount of evidence, which in the case of like climate change, I do, you have to have an equally large body of evidence saying that it's false. If so, great. We'll put them on the table. But again, one of the things that you'll see commonly, and again, it's stacking the deck and framing, is that in an argument that's a formal argument, you'll have one person on one side supporting one position, one person on the other side supporting the other position, and it appears to the audience that these are two equal opinions. When in fact, there should be 100 over here and 1 over here, because that would be the better statistic and show how, you know, who's doing what to whom. But again, you're just stacking the deck. It's how to frame the argument. So all we're doing here is just turning it from an opinion, which you can't attack, bringing up the point of you've made a scientific impossibility. Hi, Scott.
I was going to make a distinction between an assertion and a fact, to say that there are dinosaur prints by human prints. That's an assertion that then is amenable to being validated as a fact or not. And it's a perfectly great argument to support the claim that dinosaurs and humans coexisted. There's
Yes,
nothing wrong with the argument. It's
there are
all
footprints out
predicated
there
on whether the assertion is
which
fact.
do appear that to be a dinosaur print and a human print put together.
Right.
And to the ill-informed, they go, see? And then someone who actually knows what they're doing goes up there and takes a look at it and says, oh, it's two separate dinosaurs.
Right. So the
Oh.
assertion may not be a fact.
Yeah, and that's the point of, again, science. As you know, we're extremely deliberate people. We work extremely hard not to make an assertion of any kind. We come up and we'll say, well, the evidence is, and the probability is, because again, we're not working in a world in which everything is defined. We're working in the opposite world. Instead of being deductive, we're all inductive. And only when we've got a lot of evidence can we say, well, if this is true, then. But again, it's still conditional. If it's true, and so we sit from that position that no matter how strong a theory, a true theory is, there's only about 10 theories in the world. Once a theory has been established, we will still say, if the theory is correct, then. If Einstein's theory of relativity is correct, then the following is true. And we begin to discuss black holes and everything else. But until we get to that point, we can't. And that's all we're saying here, is that you have violated science. Again, similarly, oops, let me go back here. Evolution. Evolution doesn't exist. Well, again, the whole body of scientific evidence says, of course it does. And this is a lovely example of the evidence. This is a pictorial of the evidence that we have. Can we go back to any place in this and say, here is an example of this particular creature living at this particular time, and notice that this particular creature modified. It no longer exists in that form here, it exists in a different form here. And we can document everything. up to and including this little dot down here, which is us. And we think we're pretty good, aren't we? So again, evolution doesn't exist. The science says it does. And so, again, you can argue that. You can say to the person who has this opinion, what you've just said is scientifically impossible. You've now opened it up to being a debate, to an argument, which before then was closed. You couldn't argue it. Landing on the moon never happened. And again, there's a lot of folks out there who talk about this flag waving and stuff in the breeze. The problem with that is, when they landed, they also put this little device here. This is a laser reflector. And if you were down here on planet Earth, you could shoot your laser at the moon, knowing where this thingy is, and we can measure the amount of time it takes for the light to go to the moon and back. And so we can actually calculate the distance from you to the moon, at least to this particular object, to within a meter. How did it get there? Well, somebody had to bring it. In fact, we know who brought it. We know that Neil and Buzz put it there. Okay. Which leads us to perhaps one of the great bugaboos in any kind of an argument. And this is one of the things that we sort of have been talking about here for a few minutes. This is the I believe statement. The I believe statement is used commonly in almost every argument. Well, I believe. The I believe statements perhaps are the most common way of asserting an opinion. They're often expressed in religious terms. They're weak support for any argument because the I believe statement must be validated. It's a reasoned statement. Now, typically, people will use I believe in one of two ways. The first way is the assertive. I believe, used in the form of a declarative assertion. I believe Donald Trump will lead our country into a new era of prosperity. And secondly, come on, go back. Secondly, I believe, used in the form of a hesitant introduction of hearsay or evidence. I believe that's an elm tree. And you know, the same statement can be used in two completely different ways. It's one of those things you almost have to hear. You can't put it down on a piece of paper. The user of an I believe statement recognizes that it's not a statement of fact. If it were a statement of fact, they would simply state the fact. That is, users of I believe statement recognize that their beliefs may be wrong. At the most fundamental, will they argue it? Oh, golly gosh, yes. Regardless, the user of the I believe statement is sincere. If you were to ask them, is this what you actually believe? The answer will be yes. So it is a true statement of their mental condition at this time. It is how they perceive the world. I use a wonderful example where I say, I believe there are little green men in spaceships circling around the planet, observing all the things we do, all of our communications, in preparation for an invasion. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Sorry about that, Scott. Now, is there any truth to that statement? How would we evaluate that? You would ask me, do you actually believe this? And if I said yes, then the statement is true. That's what I believe. Is it a statement of fact? No. In order to make it a statement of fact, I simply remove those first two words. And I say, little green men are. Then how do we test the truth? Well, we send up airplanes, we send up spaceships, we look at the radar, we do all these other sciencey type things. And we look at it and we say, can't find it. So until we find something we're just going to say, no, probably isn't true. And so we find that the difference is really clear between the statement of the fact and the statement of I believe. So, regardless of how silly the I believe statement is, as long as it truly expresses that person's state of mind, it's true. It's absolutely true. But that does not relate to the validity as the premise of an argument. Instead, we treat it as a reasoned statement. Again, we say, I believe because of the following. And as a reasoned statement, it has to be validated in all the usual manner. It is a premise. We can challenge the premise. The I believe in statement is a really tricky one. It is different from the I believe statement. Typically, it's used in a religious context. It is used to define a belief as a fact. The fact that I believe it is true. The fact that I believe it makes it true. And it's also used to question facts, reasoned statements, and different opinions. I looked it up, trying to find the earliest examples of I believe in. These are the earliest examples I can find. The Nicene Creed of 325 of the current era, and the Apostles' Creed of 390 in the current era. Notice the statement, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and things visible and invisible. I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God. I believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. These are statements of fact, aren't they? The way this is being communicated is, I am convinced that these things are true, and this is the way. Now, Apostles' Creed, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus Christ, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church. So the I believe in statement is a very firm statement, whereas the I believe statement is one of a person's state of mind. The I believe in, that it can be restated as I make believe. I astound people when I say, you make believe? And they go, huh? Because it's an equivalent. The I believe in statement is one of personal delusion. That is, it can be restated as I adjust my worldview to incorporate these things, excluding all contradictory information. Right? I believe in the one God. I believe in Jesus, right? So what they've done is they said, I don't care what the rest of the world says. This is true. And you must adjust your mindset to this truth. Regardless, as far as the argument is concerned, the I believe in statements must be validated. It's still a reasoned statement and must be validated based on its premises. So the determination of personal truth is still just another reasoned statement. Both the I believe and the I believe in statements are forms of reasoning. Regardless of sincerity, they cannot be used as a premise unless you treat them as a reasoned statement. So both forms must be subjected to the same scrutiny that we have for everything, for all reasoned statements. So when we say, in conclusion, arguments are a powerful tool of deductive reasoning, not inductive, deductive. That is, we start with something, we say, this is true. We don't start with something and say, I have no idea, I'm going to work on it. Arguments include syllogisms, conditionals, and logic. Arguments use premises as reasons. Premises include opinions, reasoned statements, and facts. Premises must be evaluated for factual accuracy and for validity. Impossibles can be used to invalidate. So next time around, we're going to look at the other half of the coin. We've looked at the idea of arguments as being some positive way of making a statement. Are there ways of taking arguments and turning them around, making all sorts of fallacious arguments, all sorts of silly things, that they look good? Yeah. And so we need to look at both sides of this, how to make a reasoned argument, and how to make a fallacious argument, and how to recognize the difference between them. Oops, I forgot something here. Please. It's got an important meaning. So we use humor to try and turn something which is utterly dull and boring into something which is a little more reasonable. So fire away. Hi.
So, two things. One is that the premise you're making in your conversation here, the thing that's not being said necessarily, is that both people in this discussion have the same goal. And I don't think that's necessarily a fair premise. That may not be true. Your premise, your object of the discussion may be to be truthful, to get the actual correct answer. Whereas the other person's goal in the argument may just be to be right. And those are going to be two completely different things.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's up to us when we're involved in that kind of a discussion, which again is not an argument but is a discussion, to recognize what the other person is actually doing.
That's what people talk past each other.
Yeah,
right?
and so one person is arguing from a position of logic, one person is arguing from a position of emotion. Can these two ever get together? No.
No, because
They're skewed lines.
you can, we have the obvious example, right? You can say whatever the hell you want, and 27% of people are going to believe it's correct, even if they don't, because they don't care about any.
If it's on Fox News, it must be true.
Right. The other thing about it is that on your slide where you're talking about there was getting a professional opinion or professional support or something like that. What do you think about the thing that I saw was missing there was an authoritative opinion, because so often what you hear someone say is, well, my religious leader said this and they're an authority, so therefore that's my supporting argument, right? Or my father said it, or my mother said it, or my teacher said it, whoever it is. It's an authoritative statement, not necessarily a professional statement.
I think people aren't clearly hearing the point in the back, but basically you're saying authority, as people make an argument, you have to define where the argument resides or who is in support of it, where the clarification.
No, I was saying that in her slide where she gave a list of things, where one was professional, and I forget what the other one was.
Yeah, professional science, that
Right.
general kind of thing, yeah.
And I think that in many people's opinion, that should also include authoritative, right? Because people base a lot.
Yeah, the authority figure.
The authority figure.
The minister of my church,
Right.
my father. And again, this goes back again to the previous ones we had where we were talking about the human brain and how it works, that in essence we're 3-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And where did we get all of our information from? We got it from that authority, especially your parents. But somewhere between the ages of 3 and 5, your personality is pretty much fixed. Your worldview is pretty much fixed. And that depends so much on the authority. And we find this especially true in apostolic and other kinds of churches of that kind, the evangelical churches, in which the person standing up in the pulpit has the ultimate authority. And if we look, for instance, at the latest Supreme Court person, he says that the Bible is the supreme authority, and that his religion is a supreme authority, not the Constitution. And yes, this I find personally to be a huge, important danger that at this point we are helpless to do anything about. But yes, the authority figure is important. And I think many of us who try to do something along these lines keep trying to evoke the idea that no one person can be an authority. I look, for instance, to my personal astrophysicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was ready to say, I know some things are true. And then there's all the rest of the universe, about which I know nothing. But I'm trying very hard to explore it. And I think this flies in the face of that authority figure. The authority figure knows, right now, yes, and they will say, I know this to be true. Whereas the scientist, I think that's our weak position. we don't know anything to be true. We have a lot of evidence that would indicate that this is the state of the universe. Is it true? And that's where we instantly back down. And so suddenly this other person has that authority where we don't. And it looks like a point of weakness. I don't know how to express it as a strength, other than saying that we have a lot of facts, a lot of figures, a lot of data that we can inundate you with it.
We're willing to change our mind. That's why it's provision.
Yes, and new evidence will allow us to change our mind. Whereas, if you were to approach an evangelical with new information, would they change their mind? I believe in God the Father. Stops right there, doesn't it? They will not accept it. And how do we get around it? I'm not good at that. If I can get them into a position, an argument position, in which we're dealing with data, facts, information, and they allow themselves to open their mind up, then we have a chance at reaching some kind of an accord. Because it's easy to find the data, and easy to swamp people with data. There are, of course, out there you can find on the internet all sorts of things which contradict. There's several websites out there which continually point out that, in fact, global warming does not occur, and that this is simply an artifact. How do you cope with that? Well, if you look at their data, where they're coming up with it, you find out it's terribly weak. It doesn't exist. In many cases, it's just an opinion of a non-skilled person without any backing at all. But they're quoting it. Again, we go back to things like, well, just last week we were talking about the cyanoflagellates, and tranoflagellate, I'm sorry. There was a long-standing argument that is still being used by Behe and others that we can't explain the flagellum of a bacterium, and therefore God had to, well, the Creator had to make it because there's no precursors. Well, it was an interesting argument for a while. That is, no one had studied it. It brought up a whole new area of interest, and biological scientists went crazy looking at the origins of the flagellum, and worked it all the way back to the original, the very first indication of a flagellum, what it was being used for, and it turns out that this was an appendage that was used for something else entirely, and gradually evolved to do different things over time, and finally became a flagellum. That it wasn't an instantaneous thing, it occurred over millions of years, over tens of thousands of generations, but it was wonderful that they brought it up. Now, the fact that Behe continues to beat this dead horse is a problem. The fact that people listen to it is a problem, because it's been demonstrated. Oh, we know exactly how a flagellum works. It's the most interesting appendage. It's really cool. And thank you for bringing it up. It's a whole new area of scientific investigation. The authority is still with science. We know what it is and how it works. How do you argue it? I don't know. Hi.
Hi. So, as an individual, I'm not that invested in winning an argument one-on-one with an evangelical who insists that climate change is a hoax. As a citizen, I'm alarmed that we're losing the argument at a policy level and lives are at stake.
Yes. I would agree.
My personal opinion is that a great deal of our problem is that the authority has been fragmented by the filter bubble. People choose to believe what they believe is authority based on the data they receive. There's all kinds of reasons why that's fragmented and making the old ways of arguing from our scientific perspective powerful and potent. So, from a rhetorical position, where can we go when the argument fails? When lives are on the line with the climate change concern.
Where can we go when the argument fails? A great question. The good part is we have the facts, we have the data on our side.
Well, but there are some who will argue till they're blue in the face with a different their own brand of science, they call it, right? And they believe they're standing on the same pedestal we are standing on and saying your science is wrong, our science is right.
Yes.
So imagine that impasse. Now where to go?
And this is where the argument does come in, where we can sit down and look at the premises of the argument and find out that on one side the premises are very strong, very robust. On the other side, they're extremely weak. And because there is a robustness on one side, you get the huge number of technical experts who will say, yes, this is true. In climate science, the huge number of technical experts say, yep, it's happening.
Yeah, we have all that. But
So we have all that. So that's the only thing we have. Now, they have a position which they like to say is science. It is not. We can demonstrate that it is not. Therefore, what is it? And this might be our problem in coming to it, is why are they so resistant to science? Now we know, again, from the other work that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that as a 3 to 5 year old, that's where you're set. If you were set in the mold of science, learning, that kind of thing, then as an adult, that is still the mold which you are going to continue to operate in. You're going to look for logic, you're going to look for facts. If you were brought up in an evangelical household, your logic set is God, the Bible. Hallelujah, Jesus Christ is here. And that's a problem. So if they're sitting from that particular perspective, they are going to argue against anything which has to do with science.
do we have a rhetorical path to solving this problem, or are we just talking military coup at this point?
Do we have a rhetorical path? No, we really don't. In that we're dealing with facts versus beliefs.
Point of
Again-
privilege, though, can I say,
Mike?
important thing is that our society maybe has to realize the problem that we're facing, and as a culture, we have to hopefully address it. One way is you teach a critical thinking course in a junior college, right?
And we learn about thinking critically.
Right, and so if you educate your children in a certain way, then you hopefully provide them with armor for them to resist certain things that come along. You allow them to see and address facts and opinions in certain ways. So I think what you do in your daily work is very important. We can't touch everyone. We have to realize that. But I think then it gets to a point of how optimistic you are in our culture, right? Are there enough good-hearted people that are willing to listen to facts, that want to hear what a scientist has to say, and so on? And it isn't easy for a scientist to go out and make their point. And it's very easy for a single-minded potentate of a preacher or something like that to force their issue on people. So we know what we're against, and and you're aware of it, and we all are aware of it, and there's ways to hopefully address it.
Yeah, again, do we have solid ways of going out there and appealing emotionally? No, we really don't.
Let me try to make this point for the last 10 minutes. There's two different models that we're talking about.
There are two different models.
Conservative mindsets work on the strict father model. You've heard of
The strict father model, yes.
Strict father, so you've got God over man, man over all animals, the entire man over the earth, man over all and over women, America over all other countries, American Christianity over all other religions, white men above everything else, and black people and others are way at the bottom. So everything comes down the strict father. The father knows best, the father of the household.
So on the
Can
one
they go
side, you
wrong?
have the paternalistic father point of view of
all
a
things.
hierarchy.
Right, so if the child does not obey at home, it's the father's responsibility to punish the child. To punish the child, if it works, the child goes out and has a successful life. If the punishment doesn't work and the child still rebels and goes out and has an unsuccessful life, it's the child's fault. And the child then deserves the crappy, poor life and poor health and no education and no health care. That's acceptable. That's what should happen. Because they didn't listen to the strict father. They didn't listen to their father. They didn't listen to God the Father. All of these things trickle down. The other side of the coin, and the one that
let me interrupt just a second. That's the philosophy that if you are a good person, then all things will come to you, and if you're a bad person, then crap will happen in your life.
It's your fault.
So it's a direct reflection of whether you're a good or a bad person.
I think the key in that is the dogmatism of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. On the progressive point of view, you have what would be called nurturing parents. There's two of them, both parents, the man and the woman, or the two men, or the two women, are nurturing their children, and then they're protecting them against harm. They're protecting them from harm within the family, protecting them from harm outside of the family. So they're protecting them from the bad environment. They're protecting them from unscrupulous companies producing crappy drugs. And that's the protective model. And they hope to raise their children to go out and to take that nurturing that they learned as children and protect the rest of the planet and the rest of the people. By the time they're 5 years old, they're either of the mindset that they want to go out and protect everything and help everything, or they're of the mindset of the strict father. Once you get past that 5-year-old point, it's hard to change that. It becomes part of their embedded responses to everything. So
Yes, there's this protective model and there's a paternalistic model.
We can do very little to change their minds because they're already. And it's not that they're evil people. They're just brought up that this is their position. This is what they feel. I get a lot of. I got what I was spoken right now was from George Lakoff, and I'm sure he's on YouTube and stuff. And it's a fascinating topic about framing of questions, framing of statements. And you probably going to talk about that next time.
And what you've said is completely valid. That is, there's the two basic opposed ways of raising children and that kind of thing. There's the paternalistic, and then there's the loving, nurturing type. But it still leaves us with the same problem of how do we deal with the authority? How do we deal with the person who will not accept facts
Well, they won't
as
accept
being
facts.
acceptable to their
I argue
mindset?
with myself, how can a very poor, unemployed family living anywhere in this country vote against health care? Why do they do that? And they're not voting their own self-interests. This is what I've read. They're voting the values of this conservative position that they support, even though it goes against their own self-interest.
All right,
Once you get that
can we go on to someone else?
Sure.
I think part of it is you can't give up. I mean,
Can't give up.
Every argument is different. And to get to climate change, and the people in Miami have to get to work by boat. I mean, at some point, if we're correct, and it'll have impacts, every year we'll start to see more and more and more, and it'll just be too hard to reject. Hopefully it's not too late. But even the military is, I mean, they're preparing for climate change. They've got bases that are going to get flooded and stuff.
They just pulled that out of there.
Forget them. At some point, just like the health insurance, when people start dying because they no longer have health insurance, the views will change. The problem with some of these, and I won't deal with evolution because I don't really care if they ever believe it, but what impacts us personally, particularly if science says it is, you can see over time, smoking, I mean, the whole argument that they're using is one they developed in smoking. Well, smoking doesn't hurt. Well, guess what? After a while, you see all your relatives dying of lung cancer. Hey, maybe there's something really here. So that sense of individual impact will certainly begin. The newspapers will have warning all kinds of things, and people won't.
Yeah, I think you're right in that respect that truth will out. Tetraethyl lead. The lead industry was in there, and everything had, and tetraethyl lead was the most wonderful thing that ever happened, except of course it was lead. Smoking. Thank you for smoking. And so forth. So the idea that sooner or later truth will out, I think is good in the long run. However, in the short run, sufficient damage can be done, especially in a political situation, that it will take, it is so totally destructive that the society cannot recover. And I think that's one of the things that we all dread with the present situation, is that are we going down a path so far that we cannot possibly recover? One of the things, of course, would be climate change. Have we gone beyond the tipping point in climate change? Politically, especially with the way the Supreme Court is now being stacked, have we gone beyond the point of no return? Have we destroyed the very thing that we were trying to protect? And I think that's one of the questions we're always going to raise. But the other side of the argument says they are doing exactly the proper thing to protect, to save, by putting in these extremely conservative people in the Supreme Court. They're preserving the Constitution. So, do we have facts? Do we have arguments on both sides? Yes. How do we assemble our facts? Well, again, let's remember, we have arguments. Part of an argument is the counter premise. For every premise that we have which supports, there must be at least one which says you're wrong. And we're all very, very good in this room at projecting our opinion, our argument, our premises. The other side of the argument has valid arguments, which they will make and they will protect. So it is up to us to look at them and to evaluate them. And if we find that they're wrong, couldn't possibly be. What is the argument? Where is the premise? Where is the validity? If there is in fact one argument, one position, which is more valid than the other, then by setting up the argument properly, by putting all the premises in, by looking at them very carefully, we can now make the statement, this is more likely to be true than that.
But I don't think we can assume that the true statement is the true argument is the most persuasive argument. And I think
Persuasion and argument are two separate things.
Well, I think that's the difficulty we find ourselves in politically, and the question that I have is, can we hope to persuade folks who are taking policy in what might be a dangerous position counter to our arguments, or is it really just about outnumbering them?
I think when we talk about persuasion, we're talking about emotion. Many of us are persuaded by simple argument, by facts and data. And we'll sit there and go, and if the facts change, which they do, you sit there and you go, and you now readjust your thinking. Most people can't do that. Most people are stuck in whatever worldview that they have. And the problem that brings up then is, when the world changes, what do? They're going to sit back there and be very reactive to it. They're going to challenge it. They're going to fight it. They're going to do everything they can to say, no, this is not true. And that's just human nature. We're going to fight against any kind of change. Persuasion. How do you persuade people? Are they people persuaded by facts? No. People are persuaded by emotions. So, what we need is the Oprah of science.
Oprah of science.
Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson is a wonderful speaker, and he does some wonderful things, and I happen to like him. Carl Sagan was a wonderful speaker and very persuasive in his way. But if you're going to have someone that's going to persuade you, I want Oprah on my side. Will she be logical? Of course not. Oprah is not driven by logic. Duh. Right? If anyone has seen her, I mean, she is one of the most emotional, dynamic people on the planet. She's driven by emotion, and she grabs people up and she brings them with her. So it's a good old-fashioned stunt. Do we have such a thing on our side? Do we have the people who can get up there and do hell, fire, and damnation science? No. Science doesn't do hell, fire, and damnation in the first place. We're very bad at that. So do we have that emotional effect on people? Can we grab them? No. So what is our choice? To stick with facts? To continue to speak facts? To continue to look at facts? Continue to espouse facts? Continue to point out when someone is not being factual, to point out when someone is being scientifically impossible. Yeah. What's our other tool? But rational.
I just wanted to say that I think we do have some emotional piece on our side, and that is compassion. And one of the ways of connecting with some of these others are trying to understand them rather than argue with them and prove them by facts. They're not going to hear that, as was just well stated here. But there is a way of, when people feel connected to you, when they feel understood, then they may be more open to hearing eventually down the line some of those facts. So I think that we all have to remember that compassion still plays a part. It's not
Yeah, in general, when we talk about persuading people, we talk about the very first thing you do is agree with them. When you're talking about someone, you're talking with someone that with whom you disagree, the very first thing you do is you find the area that both of you can agree on. And then from that position, work outward.
eventually.
Yeah, and so you have to find that common ground. And really, when we look at it, the most conservative person and the most liberal person do have a common ground. And it's probably 50 to 75% of all of their life existence is we will agree. It's the other stuff that we'll fight tooth and nail.
We got one more time for Paul, one more question.
Hi, Paul.
Well, first of all, remember that Oprah brought us Dr. Oz.
But she also brought us a new car.
But I think we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of these arguments that we're never going to win.
Never ever going to
We
win.
can't argue
Ever.
people into submission. But the thing that we have to remember is to not give up in the sense of, if a bunch of anti-vaxxers are starting to talk about, autism or something, not be silent. You may not win them over, but make your point, speak out, and keep making
Yes.
that point.
We must continue to speak out. We cannot be cowed.
Right.
We have to stand up for that which is true. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
And
Let's stand up
Mark,
for
we're
it.
gonna slide you.
You've got to adopt 4 words.
4 words.
I told you so.
I owe you what?
I told you so.
I told you so. I told you so.
Oh.
Told you so.
ITYS. Yes, I told you so. Yeah. Yep. And the problem again comes, if it's your dying words, as the planet just turns into mush and all of the animals are dying out, the I told you so is a little bit late and a little lame too. So I thank you. Next time around, again, we'll look at the fallacies.